Hey, it's Ted here. I got a question online about the coolant tank and removing it on a Gen 5 model. Slightly different maybe in later years, but we're talking about 2016 to 2018, and I have a 5.3 and a 4.3 here. I'm going to show you the pieces and parts of what you need to disconnect, and then we'll go over the torque spec for a fastener and what the O-ring part numbers are. This is a blow molded plastic two-piece unit. It has antifreeze on one side, that is the yellow coolant, and that's extended coolant. Use only the Volvo Penta extended coolant. It's a good idea to not mix coolant. And then the other part of the reservoir is the power steering fluid. So we'll go over those pieces and parts real quick, a short video here, and then I'll give you the part numbers for the O-rings that go into the Fiat unit, and then the bolt specs for torquing it down. So let's take a look. All right, so this is a 5.3, and this is the coolant tank that we're referring to. And on the front side here is the antifreeze side, and on the back side here is actually the power steering side, so it's a split case here. There is a gentleman that has apparently a leak someplace on it, and it's only when it's cold, which is interesting. A little bit of antifreeze, summertime it's fine. My guess is when it gets cold it shrinks, and he's trying to get this tank off, so we're going to go over how to remove this tank. There is drain procedures that are in the workshop manual. You want to drain the antifreeze out of the Fiat unit, so there is a drain plug over here on the Fiat right down here on the bottom of it, and that is a 13/16 socket that you want to take that bolt out, and that will drain the antifreeze out, which will drain the Fiat up here out. That drains into it, and then it'll drain down here. You should see the level go down. Obviously take the cap, loosen the cap up. So there's, being a 5.3, it's a little more compact, but I'll show you that there are these clips, and there are these need to be compressed so that the tank can be raised up off of this. So there is one here, and the other one on a 5.3 is difficult to see, but I'll come around the other side here so you can see it. So it's back in there, and that is behind the fuel pump assembly. So what I would do is I would unbolt the fuel pump assembly and let that drop down a little bit. You've got a fuel line here, and then just let that hang out. Make sure you cut the tie wrap here, disconnect this connection. This is your coolant level sensor in it. And once this is kind of down out of the way, you can get at that back clip. There then is two power steering lines that we have to deal with, because if we want to remove this, the power steering lines are going to have to come off as well. One of them is in the back side, one's on the front side, but there also is this hose here, okay? And that hose goes from the return, that's your vent hose that comes back. So you have to take this line off to get it off. That is your coolant line. And then you have this bolt that you have to remove. So we have to unthread it and take that bolt. That bolts into the lower housing here. Now I'm going to go over to this 4.3 because it's a little more compact. There's less things in the way here, so you get a better view of what it looks like. So when we come down again on this model, there's that clip you can see way under here. So you got to take these two bolts to get the fuel pump assembly out of the way. And then what you're going to have is you're going to again come back here, and again there's that hose, and then we're going to look for those two power steering hoses, and it's a little easier to see on this. Okay, one of the hydraulic lines is in the back of the cooler back here, and you're going to have a little bit of play on that hose, and that hose comes down here, and that rides up behind the oil cooler. All right, so here is the hose that's the coolant line, and that line comes around and it goes to the power steering cooler, okay? And that line comes up here, and you'll see that it goes up behind the oil cooler, and then it goes up to the tank, and you can barely see it. Back there, and that is going to be another clamp that you're going to have to put back on when you take this off. But you can get the tank off without removing that line. You have enough play there. And then there's another power steering line. Right, so here is one of the power steering lines. It comes up from the power steering cooler, and that goes up to the bottom. If I back out, that goes to the bottom of the cooler, so that comes up into the cooler. That's a power steering hose. The other one is on the top, and it's hard to see, but that one's underneath this hose, and that runs from the front of the engine down under the tank, so it kind of loops around underneath. So those two will be exposed once this comes off. So taking this off, you need to, probably the best method that I've seen to compress these plastic pieces is to get a short extension and find a socket, like a 12-point socket, and push it up, and the socket will be just fit over these, and it will compress these when you push the socket up in there. The problem is this one, obviously, in the back, you have to take the fuel system, take that assembly out. Take the bolt out. Here's the bottom of the bolt, so you have to take the bolt out of the top. You have to compress this one. You have to compress the other one. All right, to get these clips out that come through the bottom of it, take a 8 or 9 millimeter socket. I have a 9 millimeter socket in my hand here, and then when you push that in, you're going to put it on a ratchet, and it'll take two people. Once the bolt's out, you can push on a ratchet real hard and push up on this one, and then take a V piece of a V-shaped piece of plastic and just slide it in there and just push on it. And while you're compressing this, you can pop that clip loose and have it go around to the other side, right? And do the same thing with the socket and push up on it. That'll compress it so you can get that off. Here's the Fiat that's been removed from an engine, and this is an early Model 1. I don't know if they've changed or not. I haven't checked part numbers. But to get an idea, this is where the circulation pump is. On this end of the heat exchanger is where the oil cooler is. And then that would be back behind here. You would actually have those two power steering lines. One comes in and loops underneath, and the other one would come up here behind the oil cooler and go in to the bottom of the expansion tank. The bolt that holds it on goes into the plate, so the plate is bolted right here and here. So here's the plate that the actual expansion tank fits onto, and here are two bolts that I've left in here, so you can see the two bolts that hold that plate, and that's what the expansion tank fits on. Here is a recessed hole, and the expansion tank fits into there. There's two O-rings that go onto that tank, and that's what seals this. So if you did ever take this off, you wanted to inspect it, what you can do is you can take that unit off, and there is a, there's two O-rings there to look at and see if they're cut or nicked. And I would look and see if this housing has any issues with it right here, a little corrosion or a nick in it, and maybe somebody caught the O-rings on initial installation. I'm not sure where the coolant leak is coming from, but I would suspect it's the bottle itself maybe that's got a crack in it, a very, very fine crack. It is blow molded plastic, and of course, being plastic, getting hot and cold, that can crack. Or it is within the housing here. So the only place for that to leak really is the sensor in the bottom of the tank, or these two O-rings here. There is no other area where, except up high, where you wouldn't be able to miss it, where the vent goes into the engine. So taking that off, again, you have the two plastic clips. One's about here, one's in the back. You have to take the fuel assembly off to get it out of the way to get to those two plastic clips, especially the one in the back. All right, here's the exploded diagram of the tank online, and number 5 is the part number for the two O-rings for that tank. And those two O-rings are part number 225-04617. You do need 2 of them. I don't know if both come in the kit. My assumption is, being it says quantity 1, that there would be 2 in the kit, due to the fact that number 5 points to both of those O-rings. Now the next thing is we need to put that tank back in, and then we want to torque that top bolt back in, and the bolt that goes through the tank, and we'll look at that. Okay, so here's the bolt that goes through the top of that tank, and when you put that back in, I'd put a little bit of grease on it. It does thread through that steel plate. You don't want to have that get corroded, and the torque spec for that is 17.7 foot-pounds or 24 newton meters when you tighten it. Here's a picture of the bottom of the tank to get a kind of a view of what it is. You have the two hydraulic lines that take Oertiker clamps. There's one on the right that's a little larger. That's in the back. That's going to be really not accessible until you actually remove the tank. Those hoses will stretch up and you could take the Oertiker clamps off, and then the one on the left. And as you can see in the picture, there's the two O-rings that are going to fit down inside of the Fiat into the unit itself, that tapered area I showed you. So if you do remove the expansion tank, the power steering coolant expansion tank, and you want to remove that steel plate, there are 3 fasteners that hold it into the engine, and those fasteners, when you put it back together, you tighten those to 10 newton meters or 7.4 foot-pounds. Due that these are O-rings, I would definitely replace them if you ever do remove this tank. It is highly recommended that you replace those O-rings. I never reuse O-rings, ever. It's an odd one that it leaks a little bit when it's cold, but it's fine during the summer. And it may be that this surface area here where these two pieces are glued together, when it gets really cold, they shrink, and that's why there's a little bit of leakage. I would doubt it's the O-rings. I would assume it's probably the housing itself. It's possible it's the O-rings, but until you get it apart, you really wouldn't know. Okay, so here's the heat exchanger as well, and the heat exchanger, if you do decide to take it apart to clean it, there are a bunch of bolts there. You have to remove it. You take these 2 bolts out of the engine, remove those 2, and then the 2 hoses on the bottom. What I would do also is I would take some white out and I would put a couple of marks here on the top cover and maybe down here on the housing someplace, and then I'd put a couple over here and on the bottom cover. This way you can't put this cover on the wrong spot, as well as you can't invert it and turn around and put it on backwards. The hoses have to line up in the right place. There is a new part number online for those gaskets, and the torque spec for the bolts when you put it back together is 44 inch-pounds. Do not over tighten those bolts. All right, the part number for those gaskets, you're going to need to order 2 of them because they come individually. That's part number 1, and the part number is 942770. And again, you will have to order 2 of those because they're shipped individually. These gaskets work on all 4.3, 5.3, and 6.2 units. The 6.2 units obviously are larger. It's a longer heat exchanger, just a taller unit, but the caps and the covers and the gaskets are the same. All right, so I tried to do a little video here for you on that heat exchanger. Just there is gaskets for it now for that top cover here, under here. Again, removing that 2 bolts. There is 2 bolts here, and then of course the 2 hoses on the bottom. And I would take some white out and put a, one white out strip here and here, or pieces of tape, whatever you want to use. And then also do the same thing. I do it on the end over here on the bottom of it, so I can't mix up the top and the bottom and invert the unit because it does all have to go on one way. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about servicing that expansion tank and servicing the heat exchanger, which is readily accessible. It's pretty easy to get on and off the engine. The expansion tank's a little bit harder, but if you want to remove it, you can see there's 1 bolt, the 2 clips, and then you have to deal with the hydraulic lines. Okay, if you liked the video, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.